Ladies and gentlemen, this is Joe's Jukeboxes, back with another cool jukebox repair video for you this evening. Now, 5 years ago, we did a couple videos on this Seeburg DS160 jukebox, this same exact one. And I'm sad to say it's been sitting here for 5 years. 5 years we haven't messed with it. Other things came up. We worked on this, we worked on that. And the reason that we haven't worked on it in so long is because when last we left it, it had a couple little issues. Now, the videos that we did before were all about the Tormat memory unit that's in it. I rewatched the videos just to familiarize myself with it. And basically, we had a problem where it was giving you extra selections. And I think we've got that fixed, but now we're to the point where we need to rebuild the amp. So, like I said, it's been sitting around a while. It needs a little bit of stuff done, like some of the paint touched up cosmetically and things like that, but it's a really cool jukebox. So I figured, in honor of our new channel here, that maybe we'd finish this thing up so we could sell it. What do you think? Now, this particular jukebox belonged to a lady named Janet, and it says Janet's Music and Game Room. That's pretty cool. So let me show you what it's doing. It'll play, but after it's been on a while, you start getting more and more of this rumble in the amp. I think the amp's been rebuilt before, but it's probably due to have the capacitors replaced again. I don't know what they've done with it. Some of you are going to say, well, then why are you playing it? Because everybody else has played it, so it's fine. So let's try to play this, for instance. So let's see if it'll select it. And if so, we've got that part ready. But you'll hear the rumble in it. Now, if this part goes dead, it's because they were not happy with me playing this song. Okay, so you hear the rumble in it. And it's slightly too slow, I think. Alright. So I don't know if it's going to let it play that, but basically the thing will select now. But all of the tone is, there's a lot of rumbling going on, and there's just too much bass, which we might be able to adjust, but I think we're probably to the point that we need to rebuild the amp to get a better tone out of it. So I haven't even looked at that yet. I mean, we've had it for years, but that's the next step. I think the selection thing, let's try one more. J3. I think the selector is working fine. But I don't want to leave it on too long because the amp seems to get worse as you leave it on. J3. J3 for sure. Hear the hum. And it's just slightly too slow. So I don't know how easy that will be to adjust out, but hopefully it's a belt or something. Okay, so let's open up the back and take a look at the amp, and we'll go from there. So here is our amp. It mounts on the back door. Appears to be a stereo amp to me. And, you know, 62, I think, is when this was made, so of course it would be. The Seeburg stuff, they always had such a cool way of mounting everything. They have some of the models from around this time and a little bit later had entire pieces that you could just easily remove and things like their auto speed unit or whatever it was called. But yeah. Okay, so I'm going to unplug everything and we'll pop this out and take it onto the workbench, onto my desk. We'll put it where we can look at it. Alright folks, so here is the underside of the amp. It's actually less than I was expecting. I figured it would be have more going on than this. It isn't that bad. And it does look like it's been worked on at some point. Let me zoom in on some of it here. So we've got lots of resistors, a couple diodes, a couple disc capacitors. There's an electrolytic that they didn't swap. some film caps, which I would think are probably fine. Is this a cap or a transistor? Yeah, 3 legs. It's some kind of transistor. Yeah, all these film caps I think are going to be alright. So here's a cap that someone has replaced at some point. Maybe it was a paper or an electrolytic. There's another transistor. Here's a cap someone replaced. This is actually the filter cap, and they did not replace the filter cap, which, if you're getting a bunch of humming, that would kind of be the first thing I would assume, that it's something to do with that. But we shall see. So one of the capacitors has a yellow wire running to it that runs over to this socket. One of them has a couple orange wires to it that runs to here and over to here. I'm looking for opportunities to mount the caps away from here. Really though, you could get a pretty good, I think we're going to be able to just put them right there on the, you know, I've got this screw here too. It'd be real easy to mount a terminal strip. Decisions. How do we want to do it? They have been in there doing something. See the solder? They've screwed around with something there. Alright, so we got all that going on. That needs attention. We've got some more electrolytic caps down here. I'm going to look in the schematics and see what those do. It'd just be interesting to see what they chose not to replace. Today, in modern, you know, this is 2024 that I'm recording this. It's very common now to replace all the capacitors, electrolytic capacitors or paper capacitors, in an amp now. But back in the 90s, whenever I worked on arcade monitors for the first time, it wasn't as common to replace all of the electrolytic capacitors. For a while there, in like the early 90s, you would replace like one cap whenever you did a monitor. That sounds crazy to people now, but I know a lot more about arcade monitors than jukebox amps. But we would work on, well, not we, it was before me, but people would, there was a list actually floating around of what caps did what. So basically, if your Nintendo Donkey Kong, if the screen was folding over on one side, it's a very common problem. There is one cap that makes it do that in the vertical section. And so people would literally replace one capacitor with a 2-cent capacitor and fix the monitor, and then just keep using it. And that was considered accepted practice. People did that a lot. Okay, so then it got to the point where you would put a cap kit in where, like on a Sanyo, for instance, it might have 8 or 9 capacitors. Well, these are the ones that usually give problems. Replace those. You would never replace like the filter capacitor or something like that on a monitor. And then it got to the point probably 20 years ago where it became very common for people to say, no, replace all of them because they're going to go bad eventually anyway. But there was a progression there. So my whole point is, this amp was made in 1962. This thing was probably rebuilt in the, if I was just going to guess, after talking with the customer that we got it from and knowing how long we've had it, it was probably rebuilt in the 90s at some point. And we may be able to tell with a date code or something on something. I don't know. Well, the caps usually don't have them. But anyway, it was probably rebuilt, 30 years ago. So it was rebuilt 30 years after it was made, and then it's another 30 years as it went by. So whenever they did it they didn't replace some of this stuff. Maybe they just felt it wasn't necessary, or at the time that was what was considered proper. Or maybe these were replaced, and I'm thinking that they're older than they are. But yeah, so to my eyes, we've got to measure all of the resistors. Most of these like orange drop looking caps, we're going to be able to leave just fine. You've got to measure all the resistors, but we really have very few capacitors to actually change. You've got 3 here. You've got 2 here if we were going to change it again. Here's another one. 6, 7, 8. So at first glance, I see 8. Oh, here's another one. 9. 9 that to me look like there's something that you should replace, and then whatever's in the filter cap. I'm going to guess that there's, maybe it looks like maybe there's 4 in there. So not a huge cap job, but it's going to be a big deal measuring all these resistors. Now there's certain resistors that are more likely to go bad than others. But maybe I can figure that out by just measuring through a bunch of them and figuring out which ones tend to be bad on each tube. All right, so there's that, and then also we can test the tubes. I don't know if any of that is going to have any kind of bearing on a rumble in the music as it's playing, because it seems to me like that's probably something to do with the turntable. But we need to do this first just to make sure, and we don't want to burn up the amp playing it, not knowing what kind of condition that the capacitors are in. Now that I've looked at it, I'm not quite as worried about it, but if these filter caps are original, and it kind of looks like they are, it might cause some issues. So let's look on the top of it. So if you watch the previous videos, this actually joins with the selector system with these blades here. There's like a plug that plugs into it on the side. So we'll clean that up. And here is our capacitor. This should have a date code on it. So it's a 40 450, a 40 450, a 20 400, and a 20 400. And 87689 it says. Let's see if I'm reading that right. Oh no, there we go. 235-6218X. That's going to be the 18th week of 1962, which makes sense because this is a 1962 amp. Now, it could be that they restuffed the contents, like new capacitors, up inside this cap. I don't think they did. It doesn't look like it to me on the bottom. It looks like everything's still original. So we're going to leave this mounted, but we're going to disconnect everything from it and put new stuff in. So I need some 40 450s and some 20 400s. And all of our tubes are filthy. But, you know, that doesn't really mean anything. So we'll check those out. Maybe we'll break out the tube tester and see what those are like. But essentially, we've just got some capacitors to replace. Now, let's see what our tone control is looking like. Okay, so the bass is turned up to max. That's part of why it sounds the way it does. And the treble is on medium. So the bass, I want to turn it down a little bit. I've got the one at my house set like that too. And the thing with it is, it's fine if you've got it turned up loud. So like if you've got the amp at, let's say, 60%, you kind of want the bass up because it makes it punchy and everything sounds really great. But what happens is you turn the amp down to like 20% and the bass just overrides everything. So you kind of need to adjust this depending on what volume level you're going to play the records at. That's what I found with the one at my house. This says used. Well, I mean, obviously it's used. It's from 1960. I don't understand why people write things sometimes. Seeburg stereophonic high fidelity amplifier. I know a little bit more about these than I did 5 years ago, so hopefully it'll go a little easier for me. All right, so I want to look in the in the schematics and just see what those capacitors that they obviously didn't change, see what they're used for, and see if there's a reason that their logic thought, hey, we don't need to replace these. So I've got out the schematics here, and I love like taking it slow and looking through the schematics as you go whenever you're rebuilding something like this, because it kind of helps you understand how the thing works, and you learn every time that you work on one. So I'm still in that phase where I'm learning. I'll probably learn the rest of my life. If you look over here on the left, there is a plug with 3 connections. One goes to ground, that's what that little symbol there is. And then the other 2, one goes up here to what they're calling channel 1, and one goes down here to what they're calling channel 2. Well, if you look, they immediately go through a capacitor. So you're looking for electrolytic capacitors, which are usually what gives you trouble when they age. And this one, see how there's a plus on one side? It's showing you which side is the positive. Electrolytic capacitors are usually polarized, so one side's positive and one side's negative. So if we look on this amp, this is where that's coming in. That's the 3 posts. And you can see that one is connecting to ground. So this is the chassis ground, right? So one pin is connected directly to ground, and then there's the 2 others, right? So one immediately goes through a capacitor over to here, and then this side immediately goes through a capacitor over to here. So these are the 2 caps that they're showing here and here. So the signal from the pickup playing the record runs through these 2 capacitors is the very first thing it does. So those definitely, if they haven't been replaced, should be replaced. That could cause you all kinds of problems. It looks like they did replace these. I found in the manual here, this came with it, where they bought this jukebox in 1994. So that's when it would have last been serviced. But you can just see the general dirt and things on it. That's an old cap, so that's probably from 94, maybe even older. But so it looks like they did replace them, but it's been a long time. So it's been 30 years. And like I mentioned before, in 94, it was like, if we assume that it was capped in 94, somewhere around there, the thing was about 30 years old. And that was 30 years ago. So if it was time to cap it then, it's kind of time to cap it again, right? So that's what those 2 do. So let's see if we can find any of the other ones. Okay, so we've got this one here. I thought that was kind of strange that they didn't remove that one, because that's obviously ancient electrolytic. You'd think that that would have been something that they would have definitely wanted to swap whenever they did it in the 90s. But if you look in the schematics, that's this cap right here. Now this is the AVC section. Auto volume control, basically. So if the record is a very quiet record, it will bump it up a little bit. If the record is a very hot record, it'll bump it down a little bit, so that everything's about the same volume, right? But the thing with this circuit is you don't even have to use it. If you take this tube out, it just gets rid of the AVC and it just plays the records as they're recorded. So some of them will be louder than others. If you got problems in that circuit, though, it really could screw things up and make you have sound, muffled sound and things like that. So our problem could have something to do with that, but probably not, but maybe. But we'll go ahead and replace it. But this is an example of, like I was saying earlier, for a while it was considered that you didn't really replace every capacitor. You just replaced specific ones that were known to cause trouble. Now we've gotten to the point where whenever people do a jukebox amp, they pretty much replace all of the electrolytic capacitors. So that's what that one does. Okay, so these, if you look, 22 microfarad, 47 microfarad, and 47 microfarad. That's a more modern value. So in the past, these would have been 20, 50, and 50 or something like that. And we know that actually by looking in the schematics. So there is nothing in here that originally was 22, 47, or 47 as far as a schematic. But you do find right here that C121 was 50, C122 was 20, C122B was 50. So we've got a 22, a 47, and a 47. So those are more modern replacements. Someone has swapped those caps at some point, which makes sense. And if you look on this, it says 7250. It's probably the 50th week of 1972. Doesn't mean that it was capped in 1972. It could have been done in 1994, and they just used an old capacitor. And they may have tested it, and it tested fine. But these three are part of the power supply. So it's right here. It's that one, and that one. So this is the main transformer, the power transformer. It's getting the voltage in on that primary, and then it's creating these secondaries, right? And so these three are used in the -30 and -35 volt section. So anything on the amp that needs -30 or -35 will be using that. I wonder if that's labeled on here. Yeah, so -30 here. -30 up here, of course. Most of the channels will be the same. And then the -35 would be used somewhere as well. I don't know, somewhere. So, obviously very important. Are those caps screwed up? Probably not, but I'm going to replace them anyway. They're probably due for it again, but they're probably still fine. At some point, someone has swapped them. But that's what those are doing. It's kind of shocking to me that they replaced those, but they didn't replace the filter capacitors. So let's see if we can find those. So they're actually here on the other side of the transformer. So this is the primary. These are secondaries. This is a rectifier tube. And see how it says 120A, B, C, and D. That's our 4 values that are inside of that capacitor, that can. They did such a clean job with this cap kit. It almost makes me wonder if they restuffed the can, but it doesn't look like they did. But I can't really get in there. I don't know. I don't know what they did, but we're definitely going to swap those. Those are just begging to cause problems, so we're definitely swapping those. So if you look on the schematics, right after we go through that initial capacitor, there is a transistor here, and then on one leg of the transistor there is a cap. That was a 50 microfarad capacitor back in the day. One on each side. And that is this one. So that's the original one right there. Probably from way back in the day. But on this side they actually replaced it. So it's kind of weird that they only did one side, but whatever. Volts and 47 microfarad. Alright, so both of those we will definitely replace as well. That's a very common cap. It's easy to get those. Alright, the only other one that jumps out that they've obviously replaced is this one, which is strange because that was originally a Mylar cap. And I believe that is actually cap C104, which just happens to be labeled a 104 as well because it's a 0.1 microfarad capacitor. So, and since it's a stereo unit, you know, that side is just like this side. So the cap over here that correlates to that is this one, and they didn't replace it. So they must have somehow tested it and knew that it wasn't quite right. And you can see it on the schematics right here. It's either that one or it's this one. These stereo ones are fun to work on because you can compare side to side. They should be pretty much the same on both sides. They're doing the exact same thing. When you're playing a record, though, the input on a stereo record is different. You know, you may have more volume on the left than the right, or there may be a drum pounding on the left and it's not on the right, or just depending on how it's mixed. So you get different signals in, which changes some of your voltages and things, where they're not identical if you're trying to test things while a record's playing. But it's actually a pretty simple amp. So if you think about what we just looked at, they basically have replaced the capacitors in the power supply section. They didn't in these for whatever reason, but we're going to. So you're replacing all the capacitors in the power supply section. And then there was one cap in the ABC section. And then there is a couple caps at the beginning of each channel. And that's kind of it. The other ones are not electrolytic. They're film caps, Mylar caps. So it's actually a simple little design. So we're going to swap over some of those caps, and the main one is that filter cap that they have never redone. We definitely need to get that done before it starts burning up something. Your problem with that is if you're not getting a good filter, you can literally start burning up transformers and everything else. And plus, if your voltages are wildly off, if you're running too high of a voltage on the tubes, you can burn them up. If you're running too low of a voltage, the bias might be off so much that it causes problems. There's just all kinds of crap that can happen. So you kind of need to get everything working up to spec. But not only the capacitors, you also need to go through and check the resistors to see if any of them are way out of tolerance. Most of them are spec'd to be within 20% or so of whatever the value is. So if it's 100 ohm, it shouldn't be more than 120 or less than 80. So you really need to check that too. If you get that and your caps, so if your caps are new and you get your resistors in tolerance and you still have voltages that are wildly off, it could be that you've got a short in a tube or something. But you can figure that out with a tube tester. So. And everything doesn't have to be exact, but you want it as close to the specs that they've got listed as possible. So that's what you're aiming for. And once you get it to that, you're going to get it closer to how the engineers designed it, so it's going to sound better. Okay, folks, so here's what we've got so far. The big fat one I replaced. Now, some of these I used radial caps instead of axial caps, just because that's what I got in. It's not really that big of a deal on the bottom of the cabinet. And if you look, they did the same thing with all of their little orange drops. I mean, look at that. That's factory. That's why there's a clip there. All right. So I don't want to hear no crap. You can do it better if you don't like it. When you do yours, do it better. So we replaced those two in that one. The two on the end. Now, one of the ways that I do it is I cut off the old leg and then just hook the new leg around it. Now, why would you do that? It's so that you don't overheat this. If this fails and falls off of this strip, you're in big trouble, right? So it might be a better idea to just work on the old leg so that you don't have that problem. I try not to solder directly to the tube sockets either, just because there's only so many times you can do that before the thing starts falling apart. Replaced the three down here the same way. I actually had a couple axials for those of you that care. And then, of course, the biggest part was this filter cap. So I removed everything little by little and put in a terminal strip here, which I actually drilled a hole and mounted it with screws. But that will actually, you'll have a ground post there where the screw goes through. You're grounding it to the chassis, but you don't know for sure that that's going to hold. And unlike the filter caps, you kind of want to make sure that they're grounded. So the two, you can't see them now because I've got the resistors in the way, but the two screws, I actually have a wire soldered to them as well, and over to this ground wire that was soldered to the ground on the can. It just daisies along and gives ground to all this as well. And then I've got the four caps mounted to the terminal strip, and then the four resistors that I had mounted to the terminal strip. And then there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 wires that I had to move over too. So it took a lot of trouble. I am really surprised though that they didn't replace that before, because it's kind of the most important thing to replace. Maybe they were able to test it and it was still fine. But the filter cap is your main thing that's going to cause you a bunch of problems if you're running with a worn out capacitor. So I need to go through now and check resistors. I did check the 4 that I swapped over, and they were all still within spec. But I'm going to go through and check the rest of them just to see if we've got any other problems and replace what needs done. And then we'll test the tubes. It took probably 2 hours to do this. These ones were obviously very easy. This took about an hour by itself to do, just because you got to do it one by one, move it over, just to make sure that you don't get something in the wrong spot. But I think we're good, and we can go from there. I don't like that wire on the resistor. That's probably not good. Get that down away from that sand resistor so it doesn't burn it up. Okay, so yeah, let me start checking resistors and we'll see if any of these are out of spec. Well, I can't find any resistors that are far enough out of spec to replace. They're all within 5 or 10%. This one here, it looks like they replaced whenever they recapped it before. That's a newer one, so I thought for sure maybe on this side, the one that complements it would be messed up, but it's not. It's within spec, so I can't find any of them that need to be replaced. So got off easy there. All right, so now we need to check the tubes and see if they're all kind of within tolerance. I've got a tube tester here that's not the greatest one, but it'll work. So let me get it out and we'll run through the tubes and see if everything seems all right with those. Okay, so this is an old Mercury 301 tester that I bought on eBay whenever I first started screwing around with these. Since then, I've got probably 6 or 7 other tube testers. Somebody sent me a message the other day wanting to know if they could buy one of them, but I'd rather not, because then I mean, I'd sell it here at my shop, but I don't really want to ship things. And, you know, they're all over the place. You can get them everywhere. Anyway, we're going to do the 5U4 first. I already did it, actually, but when I went to put it in, the socket is screwed up. It doesn't have the little guide. You know, there's a key so that you can't put it in wrong, right? It's missing off of that one. I don't know what they did. I'll show you here in a second. So I had to go back and watch the video and look how it was situated in the amp on the video. And but it was pretty obvious because I could see the getter on the video. So I was able to put it right back how it was. So this is just I guess it's a rectifier. And it tests good on both of the tests that you're supposed to run on it. But let me show you the bottom so you can see what I'm talking about. So the key is missing somehow. I don't know. It's just broke. See the plastic? See how there's something missing in the middle there? So that piece is broken off. So after finding how it went on the video, I stuck it back in the amp the way it was, and then I drew a line where the key is. And if you look on here, they've got the rivets lined up with the line. And also on the amp. But anyway, this one's good, so no problems there. All right, so looking at the schematics, that capacitor that we replaced that I was saying was in the AVC section, the V109. So I'm testing the tubes, and I'm testing V101. Half of it's used over here, and half of it's used over here. And I guess this is the preamp section. That's what that sticker is that says used. It's over the socket for the AVC tube. So they've removed the AVC tube, so that's just disabled. So that explains why they didn't feel it necessary to replace that cap. They're not even using it. So, interesting. It does say here in the schematics that if you don't want to use the AVC, just pull the tube out. So it was acceptable back then. Okay, so I've got this, and I've tested both of the settings on it, and we get a pretty good result out of it. Nothing great. Both tests perform about like that. So for the old tubes that I'm always testing, that's pretty typical. I mean, I don't get any that peg this sucker. We're always in through here if it's a good tube. So that's about as good as I ever come across usually. So I'm cleaning these off a little bit and putting it back in the amp. The risk you run cleaning them is that you wipe the labeling off of it, of course, which I'm sure all of you know about if you know anything about tubes. But I'm wiping them down a little bit just to clean it up a little bit and putting them back where they go. All right, so this is our first 7199. What a beautiful little tube. It's got good glow at least, right? Let's test this sucker on its first test. It has 2. Well, that one proved me wrong about the other thing, so it's actually performing a little better than usual. And then on this one, you can check for a leak between G1 and G2 by rotating this to X3. No short, so we're good. All right, so let me test the other one while I got it set up for this. All right, so this isn't good. So I'm doing both of the 7155s, 7199s tested fine on both settings. So I'm doing the first 6973, and I've got a little bit of a glow on the this short indicator. So this thing's got either some leakage or a short in it. So what I'm going to do is swap in one of the other ones just to see if it's just on this tube or if this tester is just doing that on all of the 6973s. I've checked, I've got everything set right, but I can't even test it if it's got a short because it's going to short, obviously. So let me try another one and see if I'm getting this on multiples. All right, so tube number 2, I'm getting the same thing. 457E3A. 457E3A. Yeah, it does not like the 6973s, which I wouldn't think there'd be they're probably just leaking. It's probably not a complete short, it's just leakage. Because you heard the things were working. Those are both from the same channel. I kept them separate on the table. So maybe that channel's got some problems, or had some problems. Okay, let me move on and check another one. I can't even test them, though, if it's leaking. You screw up the tester. Let me try another one. All right, so I am now up to, I have tested 8 different 6973s on it, and they all do that. So I Googled it, because you know the internet is your friend. And Google is saying, some people on forums are saying, that all of their 6973s do that too. They're saying that it's probably the way that the tester's designed, because they said that there's 2 G2 connections in the 6973 that are shorted together, so it's probably just reading that as a short. So I think on this particular tube, you can ignore that. Another gentleman said that on a power tube, that the way that the amplifiers are designed, usually it doesn't cause noise whenever there's a short in it or leakage in it. So I went ahead and tested a few of them. These are ones that I had laying around that aren't very good, and so they don't test all that great. The ones over here are testing a little better, which are the ones that are in the Seeburg. So I think we're all right on the tubes. Most of this noise, like I was saying earlier, I believe is turntable noise, turntable rumble, or it could have been those filter caps. But I think we're about ready to actually pop it back in the jukebox and just see if it sounds any different with the filter caps replaced like that. All right, so I've installed them all back in. 2 of them were slightly weaker than the other 2, so I put the 2 that were similar measurements in one channel and the 2 that were lower in the other channel, which means one channel, I guess, would be a little worse, but there's a balance adjustment on this, and it's push-pull, so I would assume that it'd be better off if one channel, if they're matched, than having one test higher than the other. But, what do I know? So that's my thoughts, though. Okay, so we're going to slide it back in and make sure everything still works and I didn't blow anything up by putting a resistor in the wrong spot. And we'll go from there. One thing I don't like about this is, since you have to attach it to that other case that's in there, you can't really get to the back of it to test voltages and stuff. If I had some of those little tube sockets that are like tester sockets where they've got wires sticking out so you can use a meter on it, but I don't have a good way of testing voltages at any point in it. So I don't really like that. It'd be cool if I could see what these power supply voltages are. But you can't get to the back of the amp installed in the machine. So I'll have to think about that a little bit. Okay, so I've installed it back in. This is how they've got the speakers. I put them back exactly how they had it. It's very confusing, though. So you've got 3 wires, black, red, and blue, that actually go to a crossover, or some kind of crossover right there. So they're connected up on the top, and they've got this little thing here set to yes. Be sure to set this switch correctly when equipment is installed. Our twin stereo speakers in use without jumpers between VC1 and ground in the same room as the phonograph. What am I seeing in the, am I seeing smoke there? That's, I think it's just cobweb. Whew! Frightening! Whole thing's kind of dirty. Okay, so who knows, right? And so they had them hooked up like this, but it's kind of off. So they've got the red wire going to pin 4, but it's not really pin 4. That means 4 ohm of one channel. And then they've got the black wire going to 16 ohm of one channel, which would be a difference of 8 ohms, I guess, if it'll even work like that. And then over here, they've got, you know, the red, if maybe that's the common, I don't know. See where it says red? That doesn't denote on this strip. It's talking about this strip. That should be red and that should be blue. There's a blue over here. All right, but they've got the blue on 4. So 4 to 4, maybe they're thinking is 8, and then 4 to 16 is 12. I don't know what they're doing. So anyway, and then they've got these two speaker wires. The reason that they have new wiring for that is because those are the directional signal wires here and here. Those only worked originally on the 33 1/3 records. It's just the way the thing was designed. So what they've done is they've straight wired them into the terminal strip as if they're external speakers. So this is all fairly confusing, but that's what they're doing. So here they have them connected between 1 ohm and 12 ohm. No, I'm sorry, 1 ohm and 8 ohm. And then here, this is actually the ground and 8 ohm. So, you know, I don't know. But that's how they had it hooked up. So we're going to leave it like that. So I'm going to turn it on, and we'll see if anything burns up. Hopefully not. Especially with me sitting here. It's moving the carriage. I wonder if there's a selection on the tour mat, or if it just does that when you turn it on. Do you see anything burning up? Do you see any smoke? Everything looks good. All right, so I'm going to try my Beach Boys record that I was playing. I don't know if I played that on here, but it was kind of rumbly sounding. So my theory is that the bass was turned up pretty high. I turned it back down to medium, and then also I think there's some rumble going on with something going on with the turntable that we might be able to fix. So let's see if it sounds any better. If it cuts this off, it's just YouTube doesn't want me to play anything. You hear that kind of rumble in it? So that's still there, but not as bad. Everything looks cool. Nothing's burning up. It sounds pretty good, but you can hear that rumble the whole time. So turn up the volume. So the directional speakers, you don't hear it in. It's almost entirely down here. So it's just a bass sound that's rumbling. So another problem is that all of the records skip at the exact same spot, which would definitely be some kind of turntable issue. It's like a remix. All right, folks, so that's it for today. We got the amp caps replaced, so I don't have to worry about running the thing without, you know, with fear of burning the amp up. We know it's not going to burn up. It's been recapped. Everything should be cool. but we still have issues. So next time we'll work on the turntable a little bit. I'll see if I can do some research and see what, if turntable noise, what would cause that to get into the amp, which it sounds to me like that's what it is. And then we'll also figure out why it's skipping at the same location on each record. About 2/3 of the way through the record it'll skip. I've tried 3 different records and it doesn't. And we may have an issue with the way they've got it wired with the speakers. So we might have to research into that on the schematics and see what they're doing with that crossover that's down there. So I hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you on the next one.